Hello, my name's Lavenna, and on Christmas Eve, my husband handed me divorce papers in front of his entire family, just like they'd planned. They all watched, waiting for me to cry. But I didn't, because I had a folder in my purse, with his signature, a prenup he drunkenly signed months ago. He lost 70% of everything. What they didn't know was that I was pregnant, and that the woman they underestimated had been preparing this moment for nearly a year. They thought they were ending something, but what if this was only the beginning? They seated me at the end of the table again, right next to the kitchen door, where the steam and clatter of serving trays replaced actual conversation. No name card for me. Everyone else had theirs in delicate calligraphy. Mine? Just a folded napkin that someone half-heartedly pushed aside to make room. It wasn't a mistake. It never is. I smiled, the way women do when they've already cataloged every slight, and filed it away. My hands rested politely in my lap, even though I could feel my fingers curling into my dress. The linen felt stiff. I had ironed it that morning, knowing full well no one would notice. They never did. Isolde was at the head, of course. Perfect posture, pearls. She looked like a woman who'd never been interrupted a day in her life. Quentin sat beside her, laughing with his uncle about market trends like he didn't know I was 10 feet away. Which, emotionally, I wasn't even that close. The turkey was still warm when Sable, my sister-in-law, raised her wine glass and let out a laugh. You all remember the story, right? How Mom didn't even want Lavenna at first? How she told Quentin she hoped he'd find someone less complicated? She looked right at me, eyes dancing with faux innocence. But look, you wore her down. Laughter around the table, warm, familial. Quentin chuckled too, swirling his wine like he couldn't hear the sound of my spine stiffening. Not a soul said, "That's not true." Not a single damn one. I smiled again. It was quieter this time, less teeth. The kind of smile you wear when you realize the room you're in was never meant to include you. Not fully. I reached for my glass of water and took a slow sip, using the movement to avoid making eye contact with anyone. The air suddenly felt too thick. No one corrected the story, not even my husband. That silence, it told me more than any words ever could. I remember the first time they invited me to this house. I brought dessert, from scratch, peach cobbler. Isolde said, "We're more of an apple pie family," then threw it out the next morning. I told myself she was just being traditional, not cruel. Years passed, patterns formed, family weddings where I wasn't asked to speak, baby showers where I sat on the edge, taking photos instead of being in them, dinners where I cleared the plates and never heard a thank you. Always the helper, never the daughter, certainly not the equal. I used to think endurance was strength, that if I stayed quiet long enough, they'd let me in. I clung to that idea like a raft in a storm. Now I wasn't so sure. Quentin's father leaned in across the table to toast his son's latest business deal. I watched him beam, watched Quentin take all the pride in the world without ever looking my way. I wasn't a partner in that success. I was scenery. After dessert, as I helped clear the plates, of course it was me, Sable brushed past and whispered, "You're lucky, you know. Most women wouldn't survive Quentin." I paused, tilted my head just enough to acknowledge her, and I smiled one last time. But this one? It didn't touch my eyes. It didn't try to. Survival was never the goal. Not for me. I don't plan to survive him. I plan to outlive him. That thought, the one about outliving Quentin, didn't just bloom at the dinner table. It had been growing quietly, like a root under concrete, since the day I lay alone in a hospital bed, the walls too white, the air too clean, and the silence deafening. 6 months ago. Late spring. The bleeding started on a Wednesday morning, just before sunrise. At first, it was a dull ache, like cramps. Nothing unusual. I didn't panic. I made tea. I paced the hallway, pressing my palms into my lower back. Then the pain changed. Sharp, deep, wrong. I called Quentin. Voicemail. I texted him. Then again. And again. I called Isolde. No answer. I even tried Sable. Silence. I remember curling up on the bathroom floor, still wearing my robe, phone clutched in one hand, my other trembling over my abdomen. I whispered, "Please, not this." And then the towels were soaked, the floor smeared, and I was in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, driving myself to the ER while biting my lip so hard it split. They checked me in. Efficient. Cold. The nurse asked if someone would be joining me. I just shook my head. By the time the doctor confirmed it, I already knew. "There's no heartbeat," he said. His voice was soft, but the words hit like cement. I stayed there for 19 hours. 19. They brought food I didn't touch. The nurse changed the bedding twice. My phone never lit up, not once. The doctor came in near midnight to say I could go home. He asked again if anyone was coming. I told him I preferred to leave alone. That was a lie. I walked myself out. The air outside was thick with summer rain. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I was too empty to produce tears. Something inside me had snapped shut. Back at the house, it was dark. Quentin had texted once, just once, hours earlier. "Golf tourney ran late, everything okay?" I didn't reply. I showered. I burned the towel I bled on. I crawled into bed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for the sun. Weeks passed. We didn't speak about it. He never asked how the appointment went. Isolde sent a lemon tart 2 days later with a note. "Hope you're feeling better soon." No mention of anything real. That was their way. Pretend the wreckage was just spilled wine. The only acknowledgement I ever gave the loss came in the form of ink. That night, I pulled out my journal. A plain black notebook. No quotes on the cover. Just pages waiting to hold what no one else would. I flipped to a fresh page, wrote the date, drew 2 symbols. An X, for what was gone. A small padlock, for what I wouldn't forget. That was the night I stopped waiting to be saved. I started mapping exits instead. Sometime in early December, I climbed into Quentin's SUV to grab a few of my documents from the glove box. While rifling through, I spotted something in the back seat. A gold-wrapped box. Square. Still perfect. I knew immediately what it was. The Christmas gift I gave Sable last year. A monogrammed leather organizer I'd had personalized, still sealed. I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I placed it back where it had been, like a museum piece on a shelf labeled Unopened Love. Back in the house, I made tea and sat in silence. No TV, no music. Just me and the quiet. I reached for my phone. There was a voicemail from Maris, my sister. We hadn't spoken in months. "Call me when you're ready," she said. "I'm not like them." I didn't delete it. Didn't return the call either. But I saved the message. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear it. But I was done being available to the people who only noticed I was missing when it was convenient to blame me for leaving. The phone sat beside my tea, screen dark again. I didn't press play on Maris's message. I didn't need to. Her voice had already threaded itself into the darker corners of my mind, curled up next to all the other things I wasn't ready to deal with, but couldn't quite abandon either. The kind of things you don't bury, just store. I sat there a while longer, watching steam rise in lazy spirals from my mug, trying to feel something sharp, shock, anger, grief. But everything was muted. I was underwater. I was floating. The next morning, I opened the shared laptop, Quentin's laptop, the one he swore he only used for his fantasy football leagues and managing our taxes, an ironic mix of escapism and obligation. I told myself I wasn't snooping. Not really. I needed a copy of the hospital invoice from my last ER visit. Insurance was asking questions. That was the official reason. But I lingered. The screen lit up. Messages synced automatically from his phone to the desktop. I hadn't even realized it did that. Maybe he didn't either. Or maybe he did. Maybe he wanted me to find it. One message blinked, a text thread. Him to Nate. "She'll cry, just watch. It'll be the perfect scene." My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't lurch. There was no cinematic gasp or shattering sound effect. My stomach didn't flip. It calcified, hardened into something cold and compact, something that wasn't going to pass anytime soon. For a half second, I gave myself the grace of doubt. Maybe he meant something else. A movie scene, maybe. A prank they were planning for someone else. Some obscure joke between old college friends. But deep down, I knew better. The timing, the phrasing, it all lined up. Christmas dinner. His entire family gathered under one roof. Isolde and her curated place settings. Sable's self-satisfied smirk. The cranberry sauce shaped like a can still on the table. He wasn't planning a holiday. He was directing a performance. And I was cast as the weeping wife. I took a screenshot, then another, just in case. I emailed both copies to myself, labeled the subject documentation. Then I created a folder titled Receipts 2023 and backed it all up. When I closed the laptop, I wiped the counter clean with a damp cloth, like none of it had ever happened. I didn't confront him. Not then. 3 days passed. Enough time to host a few fake smiles, finish wrapping the last of the gifts, and pretend I didn't flinch every time he brushed past me in the hallway. That's when Isolde showed up. Unannounced, as always. I was on the floor in the laundry room, sorting socks and debating whether bleach would fix a wine-stained blouse. She walked in like she owned the place, a white garment bag slung over her arm like an offering. "I had this tailored for you," she said, like she was doing me some grand favor. "For Christmas dinner, I thought something softer. You've had a rough year." She unzipped the bag. Inside was a beige dress, high neckline, dropped waist, minimalist to the point of being monastic. The fabric was so light it looked nearly translucent under the overhead light, like it could vanish if I breathed too hard. "It's forgiving," she added, placing the emphasis just so. I held it up, forced to smile. "It's lovely," I said, but in my head, I was already placing it somewhere between costume and shroud. That night, I didn't try it on. I hung it at the edge of my closet like an artifact waiting to be interpreted. Then I sat down in front of the mirror, brushing my hair back and studying the woman who looked back at me. Pale, controlled, efficiently invisible. A few days later, I caught a conversation while passing the dining room. Quentin was seated with Isolde and Sable. A printed guest list fanned out on the table between them like blueprints. "She'll be stunned," he said, "but she won't fight. She's grateful just to be here." Laughter followed. Light, effortless, certain. He saw me walk by. He didn't stop. That was when something inside me, something quiet and long dormant, sat up. I stood in the hallway mirror for longer than I ever had before, studying every detail, the soft blouse, the neutral tones, the way I'd trained myself to nod slightly, tuck my chin just enough, adjust my posture so I never took up too much space. Appeasement by design. My body had been edited for years, not to be beautiful, just to be acceptable. I wasn't ashamed, I was taking inventory. That night, I opened my notebook and drew 3 columns. What they see, what I show, what I'm building. Under what they see, I wrote, submissive, quiet, weak. Under what I show, I wrote, smiles, compliance, gratitude. Under what I'm building, I paused. I didn't write anything, not yet. That column needed evidence, not speculation, not ink. The next morning, I took the beige dress off the hanger, pulled it over my head. It slid down my frame like an apology. I turned to the mirror, examining the silhouette. Soft, non-threatening, decorative. The kind of woman you could humiliate at dinner and still get praised for your restraint. I tilted my head, blinked slowly, practiced the expression they all expected. They think I'll cry, I whispered to my reflection. They think I'll crumble. But they didn't know. I'd stopped waiting to be rescued a long time ago, and I wasn't the one walking into a scene. I was the one writing it. I didn't need to slam a door or tear up a dress to know a shift had started. The silence had become less like surrender and more like strategy. A quiet before the storm. Mine, not theirs. Late Thursday afternoon, I was in the home office sorting through a clutter of tax folders. Quentin had asked me to tidy things up for the accountant. I didn't argue. I nodded, opened the drawer, and started flipping through files. Paperwork had become my armor. Numbers didn't lie, even when people did. That's when I saw the tab. Post-division planning. The manila folder was pristine. Inside, balance sheets, property reallocation, and account transition notes. None of them had my name on them, not once. Every form said, Primary, Quentin Harper. Every field under secondary was left blank. And then an email printout was clipped to the back. From Quentin, subject, strategy in case she pushes, sent to Isolde, body. A clean detachment before she suspects. She won't fight, she never has. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. They were untying me from the picture quietly, methodically. No raised voices. No late-night ultimatums. Just deletion by omission. No signature. No confrontation. Just erasure. The next morning, I had a prenatal appointment at the clinic downtown. The nurse was young, maybe in her 20s, and cheerful in that way that feels rehearsed. She asked me to confirm my emergency contact. It says Isolde Harper, she said, tapping her tablet. My stomach turned, but my face didn't. It should be my sister Maris, I said. She frowned. We had a patient update form submitted, a few weeks ago, signed by your husband. I smiled. Let's fix that. After the checkup, I didn't drive home. I sat in the car for a while, then walked into the administrative office, filled out every form myself, submitted a notarized letter, and added two-step authorization to my file. Control wasn't something I'd ever had in that house. But this was my body, my child, my name, and I was reclaiming them piece by piece. By the time I got back home, the air had changed. Maybe just for me, but it was enough. I stood in the hallway and looked at the mantel above the fireplace. The family photo from last Christmas still hung there. Everyone smiling, my image blurred, slightly off-center, like I'd moved at the last second. They never replaced it. No one mentioned it. They probably didn't even notice. But I did. And it stayed with me as I walked to the living room, opened my laptop, and deleted the shared calendar I had once used to track birthdays, anniversaries, family dinners, the things they all claimed I forgot. I signed up for a P.O. box that evening, printed a new copy of all my medical records, and backed them up to a private cloud. One folder labeled, Leaving. That night, I stared at my phone. Maris. I hadn't replied in weeks. I typed out a text. I think it's time, then paused, deleted it, typed again. Are you free next Tuesday? I sent it. As I set the phone down, I whispered to myself, they think they've deleted me, but I've been copying everything. The text was sent, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't stare at the screen waiting for a reply. I set the phone face down on the coffee table, lit the lamp beside the couch, and pulled the throw blanket over my legs. There was nothing remarkable about that night, except the stillness, the kind of stillness that follows clarity. Later, when the house had settled and Quentin's car pulled into the driveway, I walked into the guest bedroom, opened the closet, and found the small lavender candle tucked inside an old shoebox. He hated that scent, said it made the house smell like a grandma's parlor. I never argued, I just stopped lighting it until that night, until I sat on the floor, legs crossed like a child in story time, and lit the candle with the same lighter he kept hidden behind his bourbon. The flame flickered. I whispered, not to the candle, but to something in me I'd been ignoring for months. If this stays lit until morning, I'll keep the baby. Then I leaned back against the wall and let the quiet press in. It did stay lit. By dawn, my eyes burned. But I wasn't tired. I wasn't anything except resolved. I opened my notebook, flipped to the back, and wrote one word. Stay. The following evening, Quentin invited me to his company's holiday gala. "You'll want to look nice," he said. "It's all the partners this year. Big faces, real money. Don't embarrass me." I looked up from my tea and said, "I'll wear what I want." He raised an eyebrow but didn't push, probably because he assumed I'd fall in line, just like I always had. Saturday came. I wore a navy dress I bought on clearance, paired with a soft gray coat I'd splurged on last fall. No beige, no pastel, no approval. When we arrived at the hotel ballroom, I noticed how quickly he walked ahead, how he didn't glance back to check if I was behind him. I stayed 2 steps behind, smiling politely to strangers, letting the buzz of expensive perfume and practiced laughter wash over me. Halfway through the evening, as the CEO passed by, I reached gently for Quentin's arm. A simple gesture, reassuring, steadying. He flinched, not physically, but in that way a man does when he wants to shake you without making a scene. Then he laughed and said, loud enough for 3 people nearby to hear, "She gets clingy sometimes. Holidays, right?" Laughter. Not mine. I stood still, hand frozen midair. I dropped it to my side, found a glass of water from a nearby table, and took a sip. No one noticed. Not really, but I did. He just called me desperate, in public, again. On the drive home, the silence in the car was heavy but not new. The kind of silence that settles after a fight that never actually happened. I turned to him. Calm, not angry, not even cold. "Keep underestimating me," I said, voice level. "See how that works out for you." He scoffed, eyes still on the road. "I'm not scared of your little threats." I turned away from him and looked out the window. "You should be." When we got home, I didn't slam a door. I didn't even speak. Instead, I lit the lavender candle again. It flared instantly. I watched it for a moment, then pulled a sticky note from the desk drawer and wrote, "He laughed." I didn't. I stuck it on the inside cover of my notebook. That was the last time I reached for him. The last time I reached out at all. From then on, I would reach in. I didn't write anything else in the notebook that night. I didn't need to. The warning had already been issued. Quiet, sharp, and unshakable. I closed the cover, blew out the candle, and slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, a Saturday, I slipped on jeans and an old sweatshirt, pulled my hair into a knot, and drove into town. There was a lawyer's office on the edge of downtown Asheville, tucked between a florist and an old insurance firm. It belonged to Milas Freeman. Maris had given me her name months ago, just in case. At the time, I had filed it under the mental drawer marked, "Not yet, now was yet." I walked in without an appointment. The receptionist looked surprised, but didn't stop me. Maybe it was something in my face. Maybe it was the manila envelope in my hand. Milas looked up from her desk when I entered. She was younger than I expected. No-nonsense posture, silver hair cropped tight. No smile, just a curious raise of the brow. "I'm Lavina Harper," I said. "I think my sister called you a while back." "She did," Milas replied, folding her hands. "Have a seat." I opened the envelope. Inside was a napkin, folded carefully, preserved like a document worth more than its weight. Quentin had signed it at a friend's engagement party back in September. He was drunk, red-faced, slurring, riding high off closing a sale. I'd made a joke about protecting my book money, a short story I'd sold to a literary journal for $600. He grabbed a pen from the bartender, scribbled something resembling a prenup on the back of a cocktail napkin, then tossed it in my lap and said, "There, now you feel safe?" I kept it. I never told him. Milas read it, twice. Then she looked up. "This is valid." I nodded. "With this, we can build an ironclad amendment," she said. "And if he files first, we win first." That was all I needed to hear. The next 3 days were a blur of scanned documents, notarized pages, and digital backups. I watched my name reappear in line items where it had once been erased. Home equity, investment accounts, vehicle titles. Not as a favor, as a right. Melis worked fast, efficient. She didn't pity me. She didn't coddle. She respected the paperwork. By the end of Tuesday, I had a file folder in my desk drawer, one in a locked box in the laundry room, and a USB drive hidden in a tampon box under the bathroom sink. My phone held encrypted copies, and Maris had a full set stored in her cloud. That night, Quentin asked if I'd seen a confirmation email from our financial advisor. "It was in the shared folder," he said, digging into his stir-fry. I shrugged. "I haven't checked." Truth was, he'd deleted the whole folder the day before. He thought I hadn't noticed. He thought the prenup was a joke, but the joke had a signature and a date, and I wasn't laughing. When he started changing passwords and redirecting access to our brokerage accounts, I let him. Let him think he'd cut me off. Let him believe he was 5 steps ahead. What he didn't know was that I'd mirrored the entire drive 3 weeks prior, before he even started acting suspicious. Paranoia makes people sloppy. Entitlement makes them blind. Wednesday morning, Melis emailed the finalized amendment. Legally binding, enforceable under his own wording. She called a few hours later. "He thought he was mocking you," she said, "but he signed a knife." I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the framed photo on the fridge, Quentin and me in Charleston, back when pretending was easier. I'd hated that trip. He hadn't let me pick a restaurant, said I was indecisive, said he had to plan everything or I'd freak out. I remembered that photo because it was the only one from the trip where I didn't look like I wanted to disappear. He gave me the blade. I just had to wait for the right table to set it on. By the time I zipped up the pale dress and slipped my hand into the clutch, the sky outside had turned a soft gray, just enough light left to see your own breath. The house was already filled with the smells of rosemary, baked ham, and too many scented candles trying to cover the scent of control. I moved through the rooms like a ghost with a to-do list, refilling wine, adjusting a crooked napkin, helping Isolde fold linen place cards that spelled everyone's name correctly. Everyone's but mine, of course. Mine was scribbled with a dull pen on the back of a seating chart, taped to the bottom of the tablecloth. I left it there. They thought I didn't notice, but I always noticed. The house looked like something out of a home magazine. Pine garlands strung across the staircase, gold ribbon wrapped around every door handle, a roaring fireplace flickering under the mantel where our blurred family photo still hung. I carried the final platter of appetizers to the long dining table and set it down beside the crystal salad bowl. 17 seats, 17 name cards. One empty space they hoped would swallow me whole. The buzz of conversation was low but constant. Quentin's voice carried above the rest. Loud, confident, as always. Sable giggled too hard at something he said. Isolde stood by the drinks cart, nodding at every guest like she was hosting the White House holiday dinner. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a wife. I was the anticipation of failure. They dressed me for a funeral and forgot I was the one with the eulogy. Idalia moved quietly beside me. She didn't say much during family events, knew better than to offer opinions. But she paused while clearing empty glasses and leaned close enough for her breath to brush my cheek. "Kitchen's quiet," she murmured. "Come with me for a second." I followed. The hallway seemed longer than usual. When we reached the pantry door, she didn't open it. Instead, she slipped a folded paper from her apron and pressed it into my hand. No explanation. On the bottom corner, in her small, neat handwriting, just in case. I opened it when I reached the hallway bathroom. It was a printed transfer authorization, signed by Quentin. The one he swore didn't exist anymore. Dated, stamped, legal. My fingers didn't shake, my breath didn't hitch. I folded it back up and slid it into my clutch. It was time. I walked past the living room, past Isolde whispering to her cousin about managing expectations, past Sable reapplying lipstick at the hallway mirror, past Quentin standing by the fireplace like he was preparing a speech. In the guest room, I opened the bottom drawer of the small side table. Inside was everything Melis had prepared. A sealed copy of the prenup, the amended terms, and one slim white envelope. I tapped it once against the edge of the drawer, before placing all of it into my clutch. I stood in front of the mirror. The dress hung off me like permission. Permission to disappear, to defer, to let them decide who I was. But my eyes? My eyes didn't belong to a woman who was disappearing. I straightened my shoulders, reapplied the lipstick I liked, not the shade Isolde had gifted me, and walked back toward the table. They were all seated now. Quentin saw me approaching and smiled like he'd won something. Like this was the final act in a play he had written. He didn't know I had rewritten the ending. They dressed me for a funeral and forgot I was the one with the eulogy. The clinking of silverware had slowed, and the buzz of conversation dipped just enough for everyone to hear Quentin tap the side of his wine glass. 3 clear notes, like the beginning of a speech no one asked for but everyone expected. He stood with a practiced smile, holding a white envelope between his fingers like it was a wedding toast. The lights above the table cast a golden glow on his blazer, on the crystal, on the faces lined up around the table, each one tense with something between curiosity and complicity. "Before dessert," he said, looking directly at me, "a little something for my lovely wife." He handed me the envelope with the flair of a man delivering a gift that wasn't really a gift. His fingers brushed mine. His eyes sparkled. The room went silent, and I could feel the weight, like they were holding their breath, waiting for me to cry, to run, to plead. I opened it slowly. Divorce papers, already signed and dated by him. I let my eyes skim the lines. I didn't need to read every word. I'd seen this tactic coming. Quentin was the kind of man who bet on outcomes, and he'd bet on mine. I lifted my head, met his gaze. Then I signed. My hand didn't shake. My pen didn't pause. When I looked up, Quentin laughed under his breath. "That's it?" he asked. I capped the pen. "That's it!" The silence that followed cracked slightly. A few relatives exchanged quick looks, unsure if they should feel relieved or disappointed. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped leather folder. I placed it beside Quentin's wineglass with care. "Your turn." He hesitated, then opened it. For a man so composed, he unraveled fast. It was the prenup, updated, notarized, legally airtight. The very napkin he'd once drunkenly signed had bloomed into an amendment that transferred 70% of our shared assets to me. His handwriting was on every clause. His ignorance made it binding. Milas had ensured there wasn't a single loophole he could slide through. I watched him flip through the pages, his face losing color with every line. From across the table, someone whispered, "Wait, is that real?" Sable's fork hit her plate with a clink. Isolde's lips pressed into a tight line, her hand clutching her napkin like it might stop the bleeding. Quentin looked up, his voice dry. "You tricked me." I tilted my head. "No. You handed me the pen." I reached into the clutch again and pulled out a smaller envelope, one he hadn't seen. I placed it gently beside the folder. "And this," I said, "is for everyone else." He opened it, slid out a black and white image. A sonogram. 8 weeks, I said, my voice low but steady. "You didn't just lose your wife tonight. You lost your child, and 70% of everything else." He didn't speak, couldn't. His jaw tightened. His hands trembled, barely holding the photo. Around the table, no one said a word. The candles flickered, suddenly too loud in the quiet. I looked at Isolde, who had gone pale, then at Sable, who was now staring down at her untouched wine. No one moved to comfort him. No one reached for me. And that was fine. I didn't need them. Later that night, after the guests had awkwardly shuffled out and Quentin locked himself in the downstairs study, I stood in the hallway near the fireplace. The family portrait still hung there. The one where I was half cut from the frame, like I'd leaned too far out, or someone had cropped it that way on purpose. I took it down. In its place, I hung a new frame, a photo of the sonogram, centered perfectly. Beneath it, a brass plate I'd had made the week before. One word, engraved with quiet certainty. Visible. I didn't burn the house down. I just took away the mask, and let the wind do the rest. By morning, the garlands were still strung neatly along the banister. The porch lights blinked softly in the gray light, like they hadn't heard the news. The kitchen smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. Everything looked the same. Nothing was. Quentin was gone. Not in theory. Not just angry or sleeping it off. Truly gone. His keys no longer hung on the small iron hook beside the door. The one we'd always joked was too cottagecore for a house like this. The hall closet, once packed with coats and scarves, and the faint smell of his cologne, now held only my things. Jackets still zipped, hangers politely spaced. The guest room door was ajar, loose at the hinge, swinging slightly from the draft. Hours earlier, he'd slammed it shut with enough force to rattle the frame. Now it just hung there, like an apology. There was no note, no dramatic final word or flurry of accusations. Just absence, clean and complete. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, the tile floor cool against my heels. The stillness didn't feel ominous the way it once had. It felt earned. I filled the kettle, measured out the grounds, waited for the first sigh of boiling water. For the first time in months, I didn't brace when the cabinet door creaked. I didn't pause to listen for footsteps, for the rustle of Quentin moving behind me, for the sharp clearing of his throat to mark his disapproval. He was gone. I poured the coffee, stirred in cream, leaned back against the counter, and took a long sip. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no cinematic swell of music, no sense of winning. I hadn't destroyed him. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't clawed or cursed. But I had survived it. Quietly, on my terms. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Maris. Her voice greeted me without preamble. I saw Mom's face, she said, when you handed her those papers. She didn't even blink at first, just stared like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. I haven't seen her speechless since 2004. I didn't answer. Just let the silence hum between us as I sipped my coffee, the corner of my mouth tugging up into a crooked smile. She messaged me after the party, Maris continued. Said you were disrespectful. I told her maybe she should have paid attention to you before you became a legal document. This time I chuckled. Not bitter, not spiteful, just tired. Tired in the way that comes after holding your breath too long, but also lighter. Like something had finally unlatched. By noon, a package arrived at the door. No knock, no signature required. Just a plain cardboard box with my name on it, addressed in Isolde's narrow handwriting. Inside, my old sweaters, still faintly smelling of clove. A stack of cookbooks I'd left in the kitchen. A half-used candle, and a sticky note slapped to the inner lid. No hard feelings. I tossed the box in the recycling bin without opening the books. Later that week, I went in for my routine OB checkup, a small act that had begun to feel monumental. The nurse greeted me with a gentle smile and handed me a folded printout of updated medical records. Would you like to hear the heartbeat today? She asked. I nodded, wordlessly. Lay back, breathe deep. The sound came softly, steadily, like someone knocking from the inside. A reminder, a signal, a small but persistent echo of hope. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and breathed it in, like it was the first clean air I'd had in months, maybe years. Back at home, I began repainting the guest room. I chose a soft sage green, something that felt alive but grounded. The same walls that once felt like borrowed space now belonged to me. I opened the windows wide and let the mountain air sweep through the room. In that light, even the floor seemed to exhale. Above the spot where the crib would go, I hung a small square frame. Inside, a print in simple script. You are wanted. It was a phrase I hadn't believed for a long time. Not fully. But now I needed to believe it. For them. And for me. The following week, I updated my will, set new emergency contacts. Bookmarking freelance jobs on my laptop became a daily ritual. Small steps, each one carving out a bit more room for myself. The bills still came, of course. The silence still echoed down the hallways. But it didn't scare me anymore. The quiet wasn't a void. It was space. And that space was mine now. A few days later, a bouquet arrived. Peonies, soft and wild in their bloom. No sender, no message, just a small white card nestled among the stems. Took me too long to see it. I'm sorry. Could have been from Quentin. Could have been from Sable. Could have been from someone I hadn't thought about in years. But I didn't waste time speculating. I placed them on the kitchen table, admired the color, let the gesture stand without dissecting it. An apology doesn't always need acceptance. Sometimes it just needs to exist. And that's enough. That night, I stood in the nursery. The room glowed soft from a lamp in the corner. One wall now held 3 frames. The first, a photo of Maurice and me at 12. Muddy, laughing, triumphant, after conquering a creek bank behind our childhood home. The second, a sonogram image, fuzzy and gray, and impossibly profound. The third frame hung empty, intentionally so. Not because I lacked a photo, but because it wasn't meant for a picture. It was meant for whatever came next. A placeholder for the future, for the version of me I hadn't fully met yet. A reminder that not every part of healing has to be filled in right away. Some wounds don't close. They stretch. They warp. They leave space. And in that space, something new can grow. And I'm still here, still standing, still mine.